Member for Markham Unionville.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is my pleasure to rise today to speak in support of Bill C-8, an act to amend the Citizenship Act, Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's Call to Action number 94. The bill will change the oath of citizenship. The new oath will now read, I swear that I will be faithful and bear the true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, Queen of Canada, her heirs and successors, and that I will faithfully observe the laws of Canada, including the Constitution, which recognizes and affirms the Aboriginal and treaty rights of First Nations, Inuit and Métis people, and fulfill my duties as a Canadian citizen. Madam Speaker, as someone who immigrated to Canada, I know firsthand just how valuable and memorable the experience of taking the oath of Canadian citizenship is. That is why this bill is very close to my heart. When I came to Canada back in 1974, the wait for my citizenship felt like a long time. The day I went to my ceremony was one of the happiest days of my life. I can still remember the buildings, the people who were sitting beside me, and the color of the carpet in the room. However, what I remember the most was the moment when I put my hand to my chest and swore the oath. I still think about that to this day and what it meant to me. When I speak to other new Canadians, I hear the same thing. The oath is a legal requirement to become a Canadian citizen. But it is much more than that for every newcomer. To become a Canadian, I had to pass the citizenship test. That test would show I understood the history of Canada and what this country stands for. This was before Canada became only a few countries in the world where Indigenous and treaty rights were entrenched into our Constitution. Some of the questions on the citizenship test were things I had picked up over the years, and others were things I need to study. Canada's relationship with its First Nation, Inuit and Métis people was not something I required to know. It was not something that came up often back then when people said Indian. It was unclear if they talked about me or Canada's First people. Madam Speaker, let me tell you about what I didn't know even back then. I know about reserves and I knew about poverty. Many of the homeless I would see in Toronto were sadly First Nation people. I have learned a lot about Canada's Indigenous people since that time and the struggle they still face. For example, reserves to this day have water boil advisories that are over decades old. Indigenous people represent only about 5% of the adult population in Canada, but makes up 30% of the people behind bars. The lasting impact of residential school and the mental health crisis has led many Indigenous people to take their own lives. The housing crisis on reserve, which was forced people to live in rundown homes filled with black mold, threatening the life of those inside. I have learned much more since being elected. I wish I had known more. I am glad that schools in Ontario are now making sure the students are familiar with these topics. That was not the case when my children were in school. There is a lot of ignorance about these issues, even though none of these issues are new. They span generations. When progress has been made, it has come to crawl. As per our new leader has said, and I quote, all governments in our history have not lived up to what we owe our Constitution and Indigenous Canadians. Madam Speaker, I want to be clear about this. Canada is the best country in the world, and I am proud to be a Canadian. One of the things that makes Canada so great is that we are consistently acknowledging our mistakes and fixing them. I was not a member of Parliament when it happened, but I remember when Prime Minister Harper offered a full apology on behalf of Canadians for the horrendous residential school system. That Conservative government also created the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, as part of 2007 Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement, which recognized that the Indian residential school system had a profoundly lasting and damaging impact on Indigenous culture, heritage, and language. When the Truth and Reconciliation Commission call to action were first released, the member from Papineau and now the Prime Minister committed to the action immediately. He was later given a 4-year majority government. When given some of his first speeches, he talked about how important Canada's relationship with its Indigenous people was. There are 94 to action in the TRC report. Although we are implementing call to action 94 today, it is important that Canadians know that progress the Prime Minister promised has been far from realized. 4 years of majority government has yielded little progress. A 2019 report by Yellowhead Institute says that by 2018, only 8 calls to action had been implemented. That number increased to only 9 by the end of 2019. One of the reasons that progress for Canada's Indigenous people has been so slow is they are often treated as an afterthought by this government. It was only at the very end of their majority government they even put the first version of this bill forward, Bill C-99. After the election, which saw the Prime Minister re-elected, the government put forward the new version of Bill C-6, only to restart again. When the Liberal government chose to prorogue Parliament, killing the bill on the floor of this House before it could come up for a vote. I recognize that a large changes this bill will bring after 40 years of the same oath. I was pleased to see that this bill reintroduced in the current session. However, I cannot stress enough that Indigenous people need to see real action on the mental health, incarceration rates, housing, and much more. I think that is why it is important that we pass Bill C-8 quickly, so that we can pass this legislation that will affect the lives of those struggling right now. Some might say this move is just symbolic. What I would say, the symbols are incredibly important. There is only problem if this government continue to deliver lip service to Indigenous Canadians, but not results. If there are any concern about the wording of this bill, I am sure we can come to the consensus at the committee. It is very important that Indigenous groups from across the country have a say. I recognize a committee has many restraints for witnesses, so I hope the Liberal government is engaging in consultation as we speak. Thank you, Madam Speaker.